What happens when arguably one of the most talented actors in a generation enters a TV studio expecting the usual only to be thrust into a situation none of the camera's producers or hosts could possibly have foreseen? This was scheduled to be just another regular afternoon TV segment, but what was about to unfold was a whole lot more. Joy Behar had built a career around cornering guests into corners and steering interviews exactly where she wanted them to go, and she seemed certain this time would be no different. But this time she was dealing with Gary Oldman, and it quickly became clear Gary Oldman was not one to be intimidated into doing anything he didn't want to do. By the end of this encounter, the whole studio was in a state of disarray, and the hosts were trying desperately to take back control of the interview. But what the majority of us have no idea about is that not a single soul in that room knew exactly where it was going. Before we jump into this incredible string of events, be sure to subscribe and leave a comment down below, because what happened next wasn't much of a TV interview, and more so a slow fuse being lit under a powder keg. What's amazing? That was all starting at one normal Tuesday morning on The View. Inside the studio, it was just another morning. Staff hustling back and forth to manage the structured chaos of a live studio environment, makeup artists darting about the final few touches, and producers hunched over their notes and checking their timers for the last few seconds before cameras were ready. It was the typical pre-show buzz that comes before any live program. Gary Oldman was booked for the second segment of the show to discuss his new movie, a bleak and grim story of power and corruption, and on paper it seemed like a standard everyday acting interview. A few questions, maybe a bit of banter and a little promotion for the movie, and that's it. What many didn't know, though, is that this interview would be the spark that ignited something unforgettable on live television. And sitting across the table with a cup of coffee in her hand sat Joy Behar. She looked quite confident and seemed quite sure of how the next few minutes were going to go. But she really couldn't have known how badly she was about to be proven wrong. Gary Oldman, the master of disappearing into any role for decades, was a man that simply had too many topics to be put in a corner like this. And Joy, for some unknown reason, had latched on to some offhand comments Gary made months prior in a British interview regarding America's politics, and made them her personal mission to corner him. As the show returned from break, Whoopi Goldberg flawlessly transitioned into the next interview. Gary Oldman entered the set with a calm, controlled demeanor that everyone in the audience and on the set was already accustomed to. He waved to the roaring crowd and then took a seat at the table. This was an interview people were not about to forget. Everyone at the table knew who they were looking at. Gary Oldman, an actor admired by everyone for generations. As the applause began to subside, Whoopi welcomed Gary and thanked him for being on their show and for discussing his new project with them. Oldman gave a simple and direct answer, using his charming, quiet English accent, stating that he was happy to be there. The conversation began just as smoothly as any normal interview. Whoopi asked Gary about his process and his preparation in playing this complex character. He answered thoughtfully about the people he had met along the way, and why authenticity in a story of power, corruption, and manipulation truly matters when you're trying to convey it to an audience. The other hosts asked insightful questions as well, and the audience at home seemed to be enjoying this as much as anyone else in the room seemed to be. But underneath all this normalcy was an impending explosion about to take shape. Then the atmosphere in the studio changed. Joy Behar began leaning in, and loyal viewers of the show could instantly recognize that familiar look that usually signaled a guest was about to be put under the microscope. Her posture shifted, her eyes narrowed slightly, and suddenly the casual conversation turned sharply targeted. "Gary, I want to ask you about something," she announced, her voice now laced with that distinct edge she reserved for guests who were clearly being cornered. "A few months ago, you made some comments about American voters that I found really troubling. It was as if you were suggesting that most Americans just don't know what they're voting for." A palpable hush fell over the studio. The lighthearted banter of the interview vanished in an instant. Gary Oldman showed no outward reaction. His expression remained unreadable, placid, even though if you looked very closely you could see a slight tightening around the corners of his eyes. Just enough to betray that he knew precisely where this was headed. "I'm not sure I understand what you're referring to," Oldman replied smoothly without a hint of nervousness. "Can you specify?" His voice was level and almost cautiously measured, as if he were attempting to reel the conversation back in. But Joy had her lines ready, and apparently had been preparing them for some time. She reached down and pulled out a printed page from the table, clearly revealing that she'd anticipated this exact moment. "You said," she began while scanning the document, "that American political discussions have become so polarized that both sides are voting based on emotion, not fact." Then she looked up at him again, which frankly sounds incredibly condescending. Oldman took a moment to respond, but it wasn't an uncomfortable pause. It was a measured, calculated one that made everyone lean forward in anticipation. "Well, Joy," he said calmly, "if we are going to use my words in a quotation, then I believe we must be sure we include the full context in which that comment was made." His voice didn't change, but the statement was sharp. That particular interview was discussing how artists must tread carefully when using nuances to present sensitive issues, not judging a large population of people. "But you said it anyway," Joy shot back, instantly pressing harder. Her voice rose a notch. "There's no way to deny it." "I am not denying anything," Oldman responded, his voice remaining even though an edge had subtly crept in. "Not frustration or anger, but something sharper. What I am pointing out is that by taking a small piece of a larger conversation and removing the context, one is essentially perpetuating the exact issue at hand." You could feel the shift now. The tension was no longer a subtle undercurrent, but an undeniable presence hanging in the air like a storm cloud. The other hosts glanced at each other silently, weighing their options to intervene or let Joy have her moment. The audience too was sensing the palpable shift, all eyes now glued to the dynamic between the two. But Joy was not backing down. "Context or no context, Gary," she said, fixing her gaze on him, "you come over here to our country, you make your money, and then you go back overseas and criticize the opinions and voting patterns of Americans. Doesn't that seem just a little bit hypocritical?" That was the moment it all changed. Gary Oldman didn't raise his voice or falter. The politeness was still there, but something else, something far more powerful and grounded, began to emerge. He met her gaze, and when he finally spoke, his words had a weight that filled the room. "A guest in our country?" he echoed, and suddenly the space felt considerably smaller. "A guest in your country?" This time there was no confusion, no faltering of the voice. "And I've paid more taxes here than most people will make in their entire lives. I've raised my children here. I've built a life here. I've invested time and labor and energy into communities here." He continued to hold her gaze. "So the notion that a British accent somehow renders me some observer standing on the sidelines is insulting. It's just wrong." The temperature in the room had shifted again. There was a ripple through the studio. Muffled conversations erupted amongst audience members. Some looked visibly embarrassed to be privy to where the conversation had veered. The others leaned in even further, ready to witness a potential clash as it happened in real time. Joy saw that she had definitely struck a nerve. But she continued, never flinching. "I'm not saying that you're not welcome in this country, Gary," she said. "I'm just saying that maybe you should be grateful that this country has given you the opportunities it has, rather than attacking the very people who have put you on the platform you're currently occupying." Grateful. Oldman's repetition seemed to land with more weight than a shouted word could have. Still calm, still placid, there was still an unmistakable gravity behind that one word. "Joy, I don't think that gratitude is measured by silence." He paused briefly, allowing every single pair of eyes in the studio to remain riveted on him. "In fact, I would argue the opposite. True gratitude is a desire to honor and respect something, and something which involves genuinely caring about a place, and in this case about people. And if it comes with the risk of posing an uncomfortable question or two, I would say that's part of being truly invested in this country." Sensing the temperature of the room rapidly rising, Whoopi quickly interjected. "Let's get back to the film now," she proposed gently. But Joy was determined not to let go. She seemed convinced she had him on the ropes. "That's a polite way of putting it, Gary." She shot back quickly. "I thought what you were saying was, you were attacking American voters, that they are incapable of understanding the reality in their own country." Then subtly he put down the glass of water he had been holding in his hand. It made an ordinary gentle sound when it hit the table, but it stopped everything. The audience watched. The studio froze. He met Joy's eyes and his voice dropped further still, making it all the more devastating. "Joy, I've participated in hundreds of interviews over the years. I've been asked probing questions, difficult questions, sometimes hostile questions." He still wouldn't break eye contact. "This is neither journalism nor frankly good television." You could almost feel the air get sucked out of the room. "You've taken a thoughtful conversation about media, about democracy, about the responsibility of having a voice, taken bits and pieces out of it, without context, and turned it into a weapon to attack a guest on your own table. And if someone is talking down to anyone, it's you. It's not me, it's you talking down to your own audience by telling them that they're not capable of understanding complex things." The resulting silence was deafening, absolute. The studio was utterly still, every person in it completely transfixed, as they all realized they had witnessed something they weren't expecting. Joy sat rigid in her seat, color draining from her face, her own expression hardening as a silent rage pulsed beneath the surface. She wasn't accustomed to this, especially not in this forum, not from this source. not responding with such calm, with such precision, dissecting her argument, her point piece by painstaking piece in front of a live audience. Excuse me. Joy attempts to regain control, but her voice falters slightly, a vulnerability it hadn't held before. This is the first moment since it began that the assuredness in her demeanor has seemed to waver. I think you might be making a bit of a scene here, Gary. She attempts the chair she's shifting in, seemingly stuck between where she wants to be and where she actually is. I'm asking legitimate questions here. Gary leaned back slightly in his chair, utterly calm, utterly serene. Anger had yet to touch his face. Dramatic? He asks. He raises his hands in a seemingly innocuous way. Joy, you've stated I am ungrateful for the opportunity of working in the States, portrayed me as some kind of outsider berating your voters, cherry-picked my exact words, and spun them into controversy, where there was never one to begin with. He takes a slow breath before finishing. If that constitutes legitimate questions, perhaps we have very different standards. The tension thickens again in the room, but there is nothing on Gary's face other than serene, quiet observation. The other hosts at the table look incredibly uncomfortable. It's obvious by their posture, the way they shift, the sideways glances they exchange. They watch a situation slip further and further away from their ability to influence it. Then Joy erupts. No, she cuts in sharply, her voice suddenly much louder. I can speak for myself. Thank you very much. The restraint has completely vanished, and what I'm saying, Gary, is that you have a problem with Americans not liking your opinion of America. She leans forward in the chair, her eyes locked on his. Isn't that the exact type of elitist condescension people are fed up with? Oldman's eyebrows twitch slightly, and for the first time since all of this has begun, a slight something unexpected flickers across his face. Amusement. Elitist? He asks. Joy, you're on television talking to your guest and you're yelling at him for responding. You're misconstruing what he's saying. A beat of silence before he delivers the unexpected blow. If we're talking about elitist, then you need to take a look in the mirror. The audience gasps. Not even a few people. The entire room is shocked. Murmurs immediately ripple through the studio and many of the guests can be heard murmuring in agreement. The atmosphere in the room has changed from tense scrutiny to outright incredulity. Joy's face immediately hardens, the red deepening. How dare you? She spits through gritted teeth. You come onto our program, our platform, and you think you're in a position to critique my journalistic ethics? Her voice climbs higher and higher. I've been in this business longer than you've been in this country making movies. And yet, Oldman's calm, measured reply is devastating. Experience doesn't always beget wisdom or professionalism. The room explodes. Joy literally leaps up from her chair clattering loudly behind her as it topples over onto the floor. That's it, she screams. I'm not sitting here and being insulted by a Brit who thinks his accent makes him superior to everyone in this country. Joy, please. Whoopi pleads. There is no placating Joy. No, Whoopi, she practically yells. This is what's wrong with Hollywood and the media today. These people make their millions from the American public and then act like they are entitled to look down on everyone. I'm so tired of it. All the while, Oldman sits, hands clasped, completely still while the chaos unfolds around him. He looks so tranquil. He speaks again. Joy, never once have I claimed superiority. What I have claimed is a certain level of professionalism. He pauses briefly. Which you seem determined to disprove. Unprofessionally? The word hangs in the air. By now the tension had gone past critical, exploding into chaos. Joy's voice, which had become increasingly shrill during the entire exchange, cracked into a desperate cry of fury. You want unprofessional? Unprofessional is walking onto someone's talk show and refusing to answer direct questions. But Gary gave no indication that he had even heard her. In fact, he never had. I've answered every single question that you've asked, he stated, his cool, contained tone more commanding than the cacophony that surrounded him. What I haven't done is stand here in silence while my words have been taken out of context and while my character has been smeared. If answering that is something that makes you uncomfortable, then maybe the issue is with the answers you're getting. The stark dichotomy between the two of them had become impossible to overlook. Across the table, Sarah Haynes looked as though she was desperately trying to throw herself between a speeding car and an oncoming train. Maybe we should take a commercial break, she suggested tentatively. No! Joy snapped back immediately, whirling around to face her co-host before Sarah could continue. We're not cutting away! Her voice boomed across the entire studio. I want everyone at home to witness this. I want the American people to see exactly what these Hollywood elites actually think about us. And at that, the conversation turned. Slowly, Gary Oldman began to rise from his seat. The motion wasn't aggressive in any way, it wasn't dramatic, but it was suddenly as though the room shrunk to accommodate him. He remained there unmoving, the whirlwind of noise raging around him like an absurd fire, making his stillness even more pronounced. Joy, he stated, his voice clear and sharp as glass, cutting through the din. I have spent a significant portion of my life studying human behavior, learning, playing characters, and seeking to understand why we as human beings do the things we do. And what I'm witnessing right now is someone so hell-bent on being correct and so utterly unable to tolerate being challenged that she'd rather risk making a spectacle of herself in front of millions of people than risk conceding the possibility that she might be mistaken. I didn't make a mistake. Joy shrieked, her emotions now completely running the show. I made a mistake by ever having you on this show in the first place. Perhaps, Oldman said softly, but not for the reason that you think. His mild tone now felt as devastating as a punch. Something changed again. Turning sharply to producers standing just off camera, Joy pointed across the set with a trembling finger. Get him out of here, she yelled, her voice cracking with rage. I'm through with this interview. He walks, or I do. Whoopi rose from her seat, attempting to quell the inferno before it reached its full potential. Joy, let's just take a deep breath, and don't you tell me to take a deep breath. Joy immediately snapped back, spinning around once more. Is it just me, or are you also taking his side now? Are you all just going to sit there and let him disrespect me in my own studio? Gary was already leaning towards one of the producers. I think it's probably best if I leave, he said. This isn't helping anyone. Oh, so now he's the poor victim, Joy laughed bitterly. Go on, Gary, get out of here. Go back and tell your British friends about how terribly you were treated here. I'm sure it'll be a great story. Gary paused for a moment as he began gathering his things. He cast a final glance back at the still seething host. The studio was now deathly quiet, as if everyone within it could feel what was about to come. Joy, he said, I came here expecting to discuss a film about corruption and the abuse of power. I just didn't realize that I was going to be receiving a live demonstration of it firsthand. The effect of his words was immediate and electrifying. Joy utterly exploded. Get out! Get out! She screamed, her voice ricocheting wildly through the studio. Security! Someone please remove him from this set. Across the set, the audience members erupted in a riot of sound, their individual cries merging into an indistinguishable chorus of chaos and confusion. No one was even sure who people were reacting to anymore. In the middle of it all, Gary Oldman remained utterly calm. He walked toward the nearest exit, with steady steps, pausing briefly to shake hands with Whoopi and the other co-hosts, without even acknowledging the continuous din behind him. And as he exited the set, Joy's voice could still be heard yelling across the sound stage, "This is exactly what's wrong with this country." But still, as Gary Oldman faded behind the curtain, Joy's voice carried through the studio. The argument hadn't ended when he left the set. In fact, in a way, it seemed to have just found its momentum. No respect, she boomed to where he had disappeared. Absolutely no respect for the people who have built this industry. The air hung in the studio still and tense. No one seemed quite sure of what to do. Ana Navarro, who had been so quiet throughout the whole thing, finally decided to chime in. Carefully, cautiously. Joy, maybe you should. Maybe I should what? Joy snapped back instantly before Ana could even complete her sentence. She was all fire now, composure completely shattered. Hair askew, makeup showing the pressure of the moment, her emotions painted clearly on her face. Maybe I should apologize for defending myself against someone who thinks he's better than everyone else? Her words poured out in a torrent. Around her, the studio devolved into a whirlwind of panic. The audience members, looking shell-shocked, whispered amongst themselves. The hosts stared at each other, exchanging nervous glances, while producers scrambled off camera, clearly trying to develop some sort of plan. It all seemed to be falling apart right before their eyes. Then Whoopi stepped up. She spoke with the authority of someone who had years of unpredictable live TV appearances under her belt, someone who knew exactly how fast things could get out of hand. Joy, she said, her voice firm, we need to get back on track. We have an audience watching. We have cameras on. But by this point, Joy seemed to care about the audience, or the cameras, or even the show very little. Her breathing became labored, her hands trembling slightly as she looked at the vacant chair Gary Oldman had occupied just minutes before. And then suddenly something changed. I can't do this anymore, she said. Somehow her quiet voice felt even more devastating than her yelling had. The room was suddenly silent. I can't just sit here and pretend that what just happened was okay. Sarah Haynes slowly began to move toward her face, a mask of concern. Joy, honey, maybe we should just… No. Joy raised her hand, stopping Sarah in her tracks like an invisible barrier had been placed between them. Don't you try to manage me right now, Sarah. Her voice was low, but each word felt weighted. I know what every single one of you are thinking. I know you all think I overstepped. She looked around the table, her eyes scanning each of their faces. I know what you're all thinking. Don't you dare try to manage me. Again, silence. Only the low murmur of the confused audience members could be heard below them, and still the cameras kept rolling, capturing every moment of this unexpected catastrophe. Ana Navarro cleared her throat carefully. Joy, maybe this is something we should discuss in private. Joy burst out into a short, harsh laugh. In private? She echoed. There's nothing private about this, Ana. She surveyed the set, her expression vacant. I was just publicly humiliated by a guest on my own damn show. Her voice grew quiet again, almost to a whisper. How do you possibly recover from that? You weren't humiliated, Sunny Hostin said gently, trying to placate her. It was a passionate discussion. It just escalated. A passionate discussion. Joy retorted, her voice rising once more. Sunny, he called me unprofessional in front of millions of people. She shook her head, a slow, mournful gesture. He basically stood there and told me I don't know how to do my job. And then suddenly she stopped. What happened next caught everyone by surprise. And you know what? She said quietly. There was a long pause. Maybe he's right. The words seemed to land in the room like a stone. No one moved, no one spoke. Worried glances immediately spread across the faces of the other hosts. Whoopi stepped closer again, her voice much softer now. Joy, you have done this job for years, she said, her voice carrying a completely different energy than before. And you have done it so well. This doesn't take away from that. Joy looked up at her slowly. Doesn't it? Joy's eyes darted from one host to another, to the audience, and back to the empty chair that Gary Oldman had just occupied. The burning rage she'd felt earlier seemed to be receding, replaced by something much more disturbing, real confusion. Because I'm standing here right now, she stammered, her voice suddenly devoid of its usual sharp edges, and I don't even remember why I was this angry. A hushed silence fell over the studio. What exactly was I trying to do? She mused, her gaze unfocused. Was I trying to strong-arm someone into agreeing with me? Was I trying to humiliate a respected actor by dredging up something he said 6 months ago in an entirely unrelated context? The mood of the show shifted once more. There was a stark, almost unbearable honesty in the air. This was Joy Behar, the queen of the cutting remark, the staunch defender of her own opinion. And now she was having what appeared to be a breakdown live on air. I've become everything I used to loathe on television, she continued, her voice cracking. I've become someone who attacks people for sport. Someone who distorts words to create friction. Someone who is more concerned with winning a debate than having an actual conversation. The audience sat in utter silence. There were no murmurs of agreement, no nervous laughter, just a deafening stillness. It felt like everyone in the studio understood that they were witnessing something entirely out of the ordinary. Not the usual scripted outrage of television, but something intensely personal. Even the most seasoned live TV enthusiasts had never seen anything quite like this. Joy slowly turned to face the camera directly. Her makeup had smudged slightly, and her normally perfectly coiffed hair was askew. Strangely, however, her eyes seemed to possess a clarity they hadn't held all day. You know what? She asked, her voice quiet. There was another pause, stretched thin with anticipation. Gary Oldman was right. The words hung in the air, heavy and significant. I was unprofessional. I did take his words out of context. I did attack him. She swallowed hard. And I did it because I thought I could get away with it. She paused, her chest heaving slightly before she took another shaky breath. But I can't get away with it anymore. Her voice dropped. Not with myself. Whoopi slowly reached out to touch Joy's arm and attempt to comfort her, but Joy subtly stepped away. I'm done, she said, her voice flat and firm. There was no hint of anger, no raised voices, just a resolute certainty.
I'm done with this show. I'm done with this chair. And I'm done pretending that what we do here on a daily basis isn't primarily outrage disguised as dialogue. Joy, you're upset, Anna said gently, attempting to regain control of the situation. Let's just go backstage for a few minutes. No. Joy shook her head, her eyes fixed on her microphone.
There's nothing waiting backstage that's going to change what happened here. She carefully unhooked the microphone pack. Nothing changes the fact that I spent 20 minutes tearing apart a man's reputation because I was too lazy to properly investigate what he actually said. Then a small, decisive sound. Click. She placed the microphone pack onto the table. Ladies, she said, addressing the other hosts with a formal, almost farewell tone. It has been an honor to work with each of you. Her gaze swept over the table. But I can no longer continue to sit here and pretend to be comfortable becoming the kind of person who attacks others for expressing thoughtful opinions. Sunny stood up abruptly. Joy, please don't do this. Let's talk. You're making a major decision when you're emotional. Am I? Joy asked, her voice soft. And for the first time all day she looked utterly at peace. Because honestly, she continued, this is the clearest decision I've made in years. She turned her back on the table and faced the audience directly. Some members of the studio audience had already risen from their seats, unsure if they were witnessing a planned segment or something much more significant. Joy! Joy, wait! Whoopi called out from behind her. But Joy did not stop. She did not look back. After years of building a career at that table, after years of debates and sound bites and headlines, she walked away from it all without a second glance. The cameras continued to roll. The remaining hosts sat in stunned silence, their gazes fixed on the empty chair, as if no one could quite grasp what had just transpired. Finally, Whoopi turned to the camera. Even in the face of such an unprecedented event, her years of professional training kept her grounded. "We'll be right back," she said, her voice low. And then the screen cut to commercial. But everyone watching knew that something had shifted irrevocably. Because if what had just happened was real, it wouldn't be remembered for a scandal or an argument. It would be remembered for something far more rare, a moment of stark, unvarnished self-realization. A moment when a person for the first time in their life truly saw themselves. And perhaps that's why empty chairs are sometimes the most eloquent storytellers of all. Now the question for you is, was Gary Oldman right to hold his ground? Or should he have just smiled, nodded, and accepted the barrage? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And for more unmissable television moments, don't forget to subscribe. Because sometimes the most compelling drama happens after the cameras stop rolling. To everyone who has watched this show for so many years, she began, her voice beginning to tremble. To everyone who has been a part of this journey with me, I am so sorry. She looked around the room, her eyes filled with regret. You deserve more than what you've just seen. You deserve someone who can have a genuine conversation without reducing it to an attack. She then picked up her purse from beside her chair and began to walk off the set.